Apeiron. Apeiron is the idea that beneath everything you can name, measure, or understand, there exists something boundless, undefined, and inexhaustible. It is not chaos, and it is not order, but the silent depth from which both arise. Apeiron represents the unsettling notion that reality does not begin with form, logic, or meaning, but with an endless openness that refuses to be contained. What makes Apeiron so disturbing is that it removes the comfort of clear beginnings. If everything comes from something without limits or edges, then certainty itself becomes fragile. The mind craves structure, labels, and final answers, yet Apeiron suggests that all structure is temporary, floating on top of something far greater and unknowable. This creates a subtle psychological tension, the realization that the foundation of existence may never fully reveal itself. Emotionally, Apeiron taps into both awe and fear. It mirrors the feeling of staring into a vast night sky and realizing there is no visible boundary. You feel small, but also strangely expanded. It challenges the belief that reality must make sense in human terms. Instead, it implies that meaning is something we extract, not something guaranteed. Apeiron also disrupts the illusion of control. If all things emerge from an infinite, indeterminate source, then permanence becomes a comforting fiction. Identities, beliefs, systems, even truths, may only be temporary expressions of something far deeper. This can feel destabilizing, yet liberating at the same time, because it suggests that nothing is fully locked into place. At its core, Apeiron invites you to sit with uncertainty without resolving it, to sense that what sustains existence may never be fully grasped, only felt, approached, and endlessly unfolded. Hakeity. Hakeity is the idea that beneath all categories, labels, and shared traits, there is something irreducibly this about a being. Not what it is, not how it functions, not how it compares to others, but the raw fact that it exists in this exact way and no other. It points to the silent uniqueness that cannot be copied, explained, or broken down into components. What makes Hecate emotionally unsettling is that it resists abstraction. The mind prefers to generalize, to group things into concepts and identities, yet Hecate insists that no amount of description ever captures the singular reality of a moment, a person, or even yourself. You are not just a collection of traits or memories. There is something about you that cannot be substituted, even in theory. This concept quietly undermines the idea that identity is fully definable. If Hecate exists, then no role, name, or narrative ever exhausts what something is. This can feel both intimate and isolating. Intimate, because it affirms that your existence is not replaceable. Isolating, because it suggests that no one can ever completely know or replicate that inner thisness. Hecate also reframes perception. When you look at an object, a face, or a fleeting moment, you are not just observing properties, you are encountering a singular occurrence in reality that will never happen again in the same way. That moment's presence is already slipping away even as you notice it. Emotionally, Hecate presses against the fear of being overlooked and the longing to be seen. It suggests that even if you are misunderstood, something about you remains untouched by interpretation. There is a core that simply is, regardless of recognition, memory, or meaning. Sympathia. Sympathia is the idea that nothing exists in isolation, that everything in reality is quietly entangled in a web of mutual influence. It suggests that the universe is not a collection of separate objects colliding by chance, but a living network in which each part subtly responds to every other part, whether or not that connection is visible. What makes sympathia emotionally powerful is that it challenges the deepest assumption of separateness. You may feel alone inside your thoughts, confined to your body, cut off from the world around you, yet sympathia whispers that this sense of isolation is incomplete. Every action, thought, and state of being sends ripples outward, just as unseen forces constantly shape you in return. You are never as independent as you believe, nor as disconnected as you fear. This concept can feel comforting and unsettling at the same time. Comforting because it implies that nothing you experience happens in total isolation. Your inner states are not sealed off from the world. They participate in it. Unsettling because it suggests that even your most private moments are part of a larger, responsive whole. Nothing is entirely self-contained. Sympathia also reframes causality. Instead of simple chains of cause and effect, it implies resonance. Things affect one another not only through direct contact, but through shared participation in the same underlying order. A shift in one place subtly rearranges the balance elsewhere. Emotionally, sympathia invites you to feel the world not as something you move through, but as something you are continuously in conversation with. Every moment becomes charged with quiet significance, as if reality itself is always listening, responding, and leaning back toward you. Henosis. Henosis is the idea of complete union, the moment where all divisions dissolve and the sense of being a separate self collapses into something vast and indivisible. It is not learning more, believing more, or becoming something new, but losing the boundary that made you feel apart in the first place. In henosis, there is no observer standing outside reality, trying to understand it. There is only participation. What makes henosis emotionally overwhelming is that it threatens the identity you rely on to feel stable. The self survives by distinction, me and not me, inside and outside, subject and object. Henosis quietly erases those lines. This can feel like annihilation to the ego, because it implies that the separate you was never as solid as it seemed. And yet, for those who brush against it, the experience is often described not as loss, but as an unbearable fullness. Henosis challenges the idea that fulfillment comes from accumulation. Instead, it suggests that peace arises through subtraction, through the falling away of resistance, narration, and self-definition. The constant internal commentary fades, and with it, the tension of needing to be someone. Emotionally, henosis carries both terror and relief. Terror because control dissolves. Relief because the burden of separation lifts. There is no longer a need to defend, prove, or position yourself within the world. The struggle to belong ends because there is nothing left to belong to. Henosis does not offer answers. It silences the questions by dissolving the distance from which questions arise, leaving only presence, indivisible and overwhelming in its simplicity. Ananke. Ananke is the force of inevitability, the pressure of necessity that moves beneath choice, intention, and desire. It represents the idea that some events do not happen because they are wanted or chosen, but because they cannot not happen. Long before decisions are made, Ananke has already shaped the field of what is possible. What makes Ananke emotionally unsettling is the way it confronts the belief in absolute freedom. We like to imagine ourselves as authors of our lives, steering outcomes through willpower and planning. Ananke quietly undermines this narrative by suggesting that certain paths unfold regardless of resistance. No amount of wishing or reasoning can loosen its grip. There is something deeply uncomfortable about realizing that effort does not always equal control. Emotionally, Ananke evokes a tension between surrender and defiance. When faced with unavoidable circumstances, the mind struggles to reclaim agency, often turning necessity into resentment or guilt. Yet, there is also a strange relief in acknowledging inevitability. The endless self-blame begins to soften when you recognize that not everything was yours to prevent or alter. Ananke also reshapes the meaning of responsibility. It does not erase choice, but it confines it within invisible boundaries. You are free to move, but not anywhere. This realization can feel claustrophobic, yet clarifying. It strips away fantasies of infinite possibility and replaces them with a sharper awareness of constraint. At a deeper level, Ananke invites confrontation with time itself. What has already been set in motion continues to unfold, indifferent to preference. In this sense, Ananke is not cruel or moral. It is impersonal. It simply is the weight of reality pressing forward, asking not for agreement, but for recognition. Logoi spermatikoi. Logoi spermatikoi is the idea that reality is seeded with hidden principles, dormant patterns of reason, quietly embedded within existence itself. These are not laws imposed from above, but living potentials woven into the fabric of the world, waiting for the right conditions to unfold. Nothing truly appears out of nowhere. Every form, thought, and event carries within it a buried logic that was already there before it became visible. What makes this concept emotionally gripping is the suggestion that meaning precedes manifestation. Your actions, your growth, even your struggles may not be random reactions to chaos, but the gradual awakening of something already planted within you. This can feel deeply affirming, as if your life is not accidental, yet it is also unsettling because it implies direction without permission. You are unfolding whether you consciously choose to or not. Logoi spermatikoi disrupts the belief that you are freely inventing yourself from nothing. Instead, it hints that your tendencies, insights, and transformations emerge from latent structures you did not design. There is a quiet pressure in this idea, a sense that existence is guiding itself through you, using you as a site where hidden possibilities come into form. Emotionally, this creates tension between freedom and inevitability. If the seeds are already there, how much of your becoming is truly yours? And yet, without your participation, those seeds remain unrealized. You are both the soil and the growth, shaped by forces older than awareness itself. This concept invites you to look at reality as layered with intention, not imposed or moral, but organic and unfolding. Every moment becomes a revelation of something long embedded, surfacing just in time to change the shape of what you thought was spontaneous. Panpsychic micro-experientialism. Panpsychic micro-experientialism is the idea that experience is not exclusive to minds, brains, or living beings, but is woven into the smallest units of reality itself. It suggests that consciousness does not suddenly appear at a certain level of complexity, but exists in faint, primitive forms everywhere, long before thought, language, or identity emerge. What makes this concept emotionally disorienting is that it collapses the hierarchy between the alive and the inanimate. The world stops being a dead stage on which consciousness performs and becomes something quietly awake at every level. The boundary between me and everything else begins to blur, not metaphorically, but ontologically. You are no longer an isolated pocket of awareness surrounded by emptiness. You are a complex expression of something already present everywhere. This idea unsettles the comfort of human specialness. If even the smallest fragments of reality possess some minimal form of experience, then consciousness is not a rare miracle, but a fundamental feature of existence. That realization can feel humbling, even threatening, because it removes the sense of standing above the world as an observer. You are inside the same continuum as everything you touch. Emotionally, panpsychic micro-experientialism invites a quiet shift in perception. Objects lose their complete silence. The world feels less mechanical and more intimate, as if reality itself has an interior dimension you normally overlook. This can awaken a sense of reverence, but also unease, because it implies that nothing is entirely empty or inert. If experience is everywhere, then isolation becomes a perceptual illusion, and awareness stops being something you possess and becomes something you participate in moment by moment, without ever fully noticing where it begins or ends. Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is the idea that creation begins not with expansion, but with withdrawal. It suggests that for anything to exist at all, something infinite had to make space by pulling back. Instead of overflowing into form, the source contracts, leaving an absence where reality can emerge. Existence is born not from presence alone, but from a deliberate void. What makes Tzimtzum emotionally gripping is the way it reframes absence. Emptiness is usually experienced as loss, abandonment, or lack. Yet Tzimtzum implies that absence can be an act of care. Space is not evidence of neglect, but of restraint. The distance you feel between yourself and meaning, between desire and fulfillment, may not be a mistake, but a condition that allows you to exist at all. This idea quietly unsettles the expectation that fullness is always better than emptiness. It suggests that too much presence would erase individuality entirely. If the infinite never withdrew, there would be no room for difference, choice, or experience. You exist because something stepped back. Emotionally, Tzimtzum resonates with the pain of separation. The silence you encounter in moments of longing, grief, or confusion can feel like abandonment. Yet this concept hints that silence itself may be generative. The gap you feel may be the very space where your freedom takes shape. Tzimtzum also reframes suffering. Struggle does not necessarily mean something has gone wrong. It may mean you are living inside a space that was intentionally left open, a space where uncertainty, growth, and becoming are possible because something infinite chose not to fill everything at once. Metaxy. Metaxy is the condition of being suspended between worlds, meanings, or states of being, never fully arriving and never fully leaving. It describes the tension of existing in the between, where certainty dissolves, but clarity has not yet formed. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you will become, and that in-between space is where metaxy lives. What makes metaxy emotionally intense is how deeply uncomfortable the human mind finds unresolved states. We crave closure, identity, and direction, yet metaxy refuses to provide them. It stretches time, making moments feel heavy and unstable, as if the ground beneath you is constantly shifting. This can feel like disorientation, anxiety, or even quiet despair, because nothing feels settled enough to hold on to. At the same time, metaxy is where transformation happens. When old structures collapse and new ones have not yet formed, perception becomes raw and heightened. The familiar stories you tell yourself no longer work, forcing you to confront reality without filters. This exposure can feel frightening, but it also opens a rare kind of honesty. You begin to notice how much of your sense of self was built on temporary arrangements. Emotionally, metaxy carries loneliness. Being between means you often cannot fully relate to those who are firmly anchored on either side. You may feel unseen, misunderstood, or out of sync with the world. Yet this same distance creates depth. From the threshold, you can sense contradictions, paradoxes, and hidden connections that certainty would normally obscure. Metaxy teaches that meaning is not only found in arrival, but in tension itself. The space between is not empty. It is charged, unstable, and alive, quietly reshaping you while you wait for something solid to return. Atemporal causation. Atemporal causation is the idea that cause and effect do not always move forward through time in a clean, linear sequence. It suggests that some events are connected not by before and after, but by a deeper structure where outcomes and origins coexist. Something can influence something else without waiting its turn in time. What makes this concept emotionally disorienting is how directly it attacks the sense of narrative we use to understand our lives. You rely on the belief that the past creates the present, and the present shapes the future. Atemporal causation destabilizes that comfort. It hints that certain outcomes may already be woven into the fabric of reality, quietly shaping the present from outside the timeline you experience. Emotionally, this can feel like fate pressing inward from all directions at once. Decisions begin to feel less like isolated choices and more like points of alignment, moments where something already formed finally reveals itself. This does not erase responsibility, but it reframes it. You are not only acting forward in time, you are responding to patterns that do not belong to any single moment. Atemporal causation also reshapes regret and anticipation. If causes are not strictly behind you, then the future is not empty. It is active, exerting pressure, pulling events toward coherence. This can feel unsettling, as if control is slipping, yet also comforting, as if nothing meaningful is ever truly lost or wasted. At a deeper emotional level, this idea suggests that understanding comes not from tracing origins, but from sensing alignment. Certain moments feel inevitable, not because they were forced, but because time itself was never the true container of causality to begin with. Ontic vibration. Ontic vibration is the idea that being itself is not static, solid, or fixed, but constantly trembling into existence. It suggests that reality is not made of stable things, but of continuous movement at the deepest level, a subtle oscillation that gives rise to form, identity, and presence. Nothing simply is. Everything is always in the act of becoming. What makes ontic vibration emotionally unsettling is that it destabilizes the sense of permanence you rely on to feel grounded. You experience yourself as a coherent entity, yet this concept implies that your existence is more like a rhythm than a structure. The feeling of solidity is a byproduct of motion, repeating fast enough to feel still. Beneath that illusion, everything is in flux. This idea reframes anxiety, restlessness, and inner tension. If being itself vibrates, then unease is not a flaw in existence, but an echo of its fundamental nature. The subtle hum you feel in moments of silence, anticipation, or disquiet may not be psychological noise, but resonance with reality's constant movement. Stillness, in this view, is not the absence of motion, but perfect balance within it. Ontic vibration also challenges control. If existence is oscillation, then holding on too tightly creates resistance. Identity becomes a pattern you ride rather than a position you defend. This can feel frightening because it means there is no final ground to stand on, only shifting frequencies to attune to. Emotionally, this concept invites a different relationship with change. Loss, growth, and instability stop feeling like interruptions and start feeling like expressions of the same underlying pulse. You are not breaking apart when things shift. You are vibrating with the same force that keeps existence alive moment by moment, without ever fully settling into rest. Neutral monism. Neutral monism is the idea that the deepest layer of reality is neither mental nor physical, but something prior to both. Mind and matter, thoughts and objects, inner experience and outer world are not separate substances colliding with each other, but different expressions of the same underlying neutral ground. What you feel and what you touch are two ways the same reality appears. What makes neutral monism emotionally disorienting is how it dissolves the boundary you rely on to feel anchored. You experience yourself as a mind trapped inside a body, looking out at a world that feels solid and external. Neutral monism quietly undermines this division. It suggests that the wall between inner and outer may be more like a thin conceptual line than a real separation. The world is not as outside of you as it seems, and you are not as contained as you believe. This idea destabilizes certainty on both sides. If reality is not fundamentally physical, then matter loses its claim to being the ultimate foundation. If it is not fundamentally mental, then consciousness loses its privileged position as the origin of everything. Instead, both emerge from something more basic and harder to grasp, something that refuses to take sides. Emotionally, neutral monism can feel strangely relieving. The pressure to explain how mind connects to matter begins to loosen. The sense of being split between thoughts and sensations softens. Experience becomes more continuous, less fractured. At the same time, it introduces unease. If neither mind nor matter is primary, then the deepest truth of existence may never fit neatly into human categories, leaving you suspended in a reality that simply is before it becomes anything you can name. Emanationism. Emanationism is the idea that reality unfolds not through sudden creation or violent rupture, but through a gradual overflowing from a single source. Everything that exists is seen as a diminishing expression of an original fullness, radiating outward in layers, each step slightly further from the origin, yet never completely severed from it. What makes emanationism emotionally compelling is the way it reframes distance and loss. Instead of seeing separation as abandonment, it suggests that even the most fragmented or broken parts of reality still carry a trace of their source. Nothing is entirely cut off. Even decay and imperfection are part of a continuous unfolding rather than a fall into meaninglessness. This concept subtly challenges the idea that existence is accidental. If everything flows from a single origin, then being itself carries an inherited structure, a kind of memory of where it came from. Emotionally, this can stir a sense of longing, as if something within you recognizes that it once belonged to a deeper unity. That quiet ache for wholeness begins to feel less irrational and more fundamental. Emanationism also alters how hierarchy is felt. Instead of power imposed from above, it describes influence as proximity to source. The further something unfolds, the more complex and unstable it becomes. This can evoke both humility and tenderness toward imperfection. Weakness is no longer failure, but distance. At an emotional level, emanationism softens despair. Even in moments of fragmentation, it implies continuity. You are not outside the flow, you are within it. What feels like separation may simply be another stage of expression, carrying the origin forward in a more diluted but still meaningful form. Hyperobjects. Hyperobjects are entities so vast in scale and duration that they cannot be fully grasped by human perception, even though they shape your life constantly. You never encounter them all at once. You only experience fragments, symptoms, or effects, while the thing itself remains dispersed across time and space, always partially hidden from view. What makes hyperobjects emotionally unsettling is the way they undermine the sense that reality is manageable. You are used to thinking in terms of objects you can point to, boundaries you can define, problems you can locate. Hyperobjects refuse this comfort. They surround you, pass through you, and outlast you, while remaining impossible to hold in the mind as a single image. Emotionally, this creates a low-grade existential pressure. You feel affected by something you cannot fully confront. The cause of your anxiety is real, but never entirely present. This produces a strange mixture of helplessness and responsibility. You are implicated in forces far larger than yourself, yet unable to see their full scope. Hyperobjects also fracture the illusion of immediacy. They stretch across generations, making individual moments feel both insignificant and crucial. Your actions seem tiny, yet they accumulate into something vast and irreversible. This duality can feel paralyzing, as if meaning is both everywhere and nowhere at once. At a deeper level, hyperobjects force a shift in perception. They demand that you relate to reality not through mastery or control, but through humility and endurance. You are no longer the central observer standing outside the system. You are inside it, moving through something that will continue long after your perspective disappears. Implicate order. Implicate order is the idea that beneath the chaos and fragmentation you perceive on the surface of reality, there exists a deeper, hidden coherence quietly shaping everything. What appears random, broken, or disconnected may be the visible expression of an underlying order folded so deeply into existence that it cannot be directly seen, only inferred. Reality, in this view, is not disordered, but encrypted. What makes implicate order emotionally gripping is that it reframes confusion and uncertainty. Moments in life that feel meaningless or cruel may not be accidents, but partial glimpses of a structure too complex to reveal itself all at once. This does not make suffering disappear, but it changes how it is held. The mind resists this idea because it removes the comfort of simple explanations while offering something more unsettling. That meaning may exist without being accessible. Implicate order challenges the habit of judging reality by appearances alone. What unfolds in time and space is only the explicate surface, like ripples on water, while the deeper pattern remains folded inward. This creates a tension between what you experience and what might be operating beyond perception. You sense that something is there, shaping outcomes, synchronizing events, and weaving connections you only notice after the fact. Emotionally, this concept provokes awe and frustration at the same time. Awe, because reality feels intelligent in a way that does not announce itself. Frustration, because clarity is always delayed, arriving only in fragments or hindsight. You are left navigating a world where meaning may be present long before it becomes visible, forcing trust without confirmation. Implicate order quietly suggests that confusion is not the absence of structure, but contact with depth. Prehension. Prehension is the idea that reality is built from acts of feeling, grasping, and responding rather than from static objects. It suggests that to exist is not merely to be present, but to take account of other things, to register them in some way. Even at the most basic level, existence involves a kind of sensitivity, a primitive awareness that reaches outward and inward at the same time. What makes prehension emotionally striking is how it reframes experience. You are not a passive observer moving through a dead world. You are continuously taking in, absorbing, and being shaped by what surrounds you. At the same time, everything you encounter is also, in its own way, responding to you. Reality becomes a field of mutual influence rather than a stage of inert matter. This concept subtly erodes the comfort of detachment. If prehension is fundamental, then nothing is ever completely untouched. Every moment carries traces of what came before, and every interaction leaves an imprint. You are not simply reacting to the world. You are partially composed of what you have already felt, noticed, and integrated. Emotionally, prehension intensifies responsibility. If existence itself involves taking others into account, then indifference becomes harder to justify. Even ignoring something is a kind of response. You are always participating, even when you believe you are withdrawing. Prehension also brings intimacy into unexpected places. The boundary between self and world softens as experience becomes a continuous process of mutual inclusion. You are not sealed off behind your senses. You are an ongoing act of contact, constantly shaped by what you encounter and constantly shaping it in return. Qualia fields. Qualia fields are the idea that subjective experience does not exist in isolation within individual minds, but arises within shared, overlapping fields of sensation and meaning. Instead of consciousness being sealed inside separate skulls, this concept suggests that feelings, moods, and raw experiences spread, resonate, and influence one another across invisible boundaries. What makes qualia fields emotionally unsettling is the implication that your inner life may not be as private as it feels. The emotions you carry, the tone of your awareness, even the way you perceive color, pain, or joy may be subtly shaped by the experiential atmosphere around you. You do not just have feelings. You move through fields of feeling that were already present before you noticed them. This idea explains why certain places feel heavy, peaceful, or charged without obvious cause. It also explains why being around certain people can shift your emotional state almost instantly. Something deeper than words is being exchanged. Your nervous system is tuning itself to a shared experiential space, absorbing cues that never rise to conscious awareness. Emotionally, qualia fields challenge the boundary between empathy and identity. If experiences overlap, then understanding another's pain or joy is not merely imagination, but partial participation. This can be overwhelming. It suggests that emotional exhaustion, collective anxiety, and shared hope are not metaphors, but lived realities circulating through groups, cultures, and moments in time. Qualia fields also imply responsibility. What you feel does not end with you. Your inner states contribute to the emotional texture of the world you inhabit. Even silence carries a tone. Awareness becomes less about self-management and more about recognizing how deeply entangled experience truly is, even when no one is speaking. Ancestral time. Ancestral time is the idea that time does not begin with human awareness, memory, or perception, but stretches far beyond the reach of any observer. It refers to a dimension of time that existed before there were minds to register it, before language, meaning, or experience could frame it. This challenges the comforting belief that time is defined by what can be remembered or witnessed. What makes ancestral time emotionally unsettling is that it removes humanity from the center of temporal reality. Your sense of past and future feels intimate, shaped by memory and anticipation. Yet ancestral time suggests that vast stretches of existence unfolded without anyone to notice them. Entire histories occurred in silence, indifferent to recognition. This can evoke a quiet existential vertigo, the feeling that meaning is not guaranteed by observation. Ancestral time also destabilizes the link between experience and reality. If time existed before experience, then reality is not dependent on being felt, understood, or acknowledged. Events do not need witnesses to be real. This undermines the subtle assumption that consciousness somehow anchors existence. Instead, consciousness becomes something that arrives late, stepping into a story already in progress. Emotionally, this concept carries both humility and loss. Humility because it reveals how small the human window of awareness truly is. Loss because it suggests that most of reality's unfolding will never be known, remembered, or integrated into narrative. There are truths that occurred and vanished without ever touching a mind. Ancestral time invites you to feel the weight of a universe that does not revolve around perception, where time moves with or without you, vast, indifferent, and uninterrupted. Morphogenetic fields. Morphogenetic fields describe the idea that form, behavior, and structure are guided by invisible patterns that exist beyond physical matter. They suggest that things do not organize themselves purely by mechanical rules or genetic instructions, but by drawing from a shared field of memory that shapes how they grow, move, and repeat. What has happened before subtly influences what can happen again. What makes this idea emotionally provocative is the way it challenges isolation. If morphogenetic fields exist, then nothing truly begins from zero. Every action, habit, and form is quietly supported by the accumulated past of similar actions and forms. You are not only the result of your personal history, but also of patterns that existed long before you were aware of them. This can feel both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it suggests you are not struggling alone. Change may feel impossible, yet others who came before you may have already weakened the path. Unsettling because it implies that patterns you wish to escape may have a deeper momentum than you realized. Some tendencies persist not because you chose them, but because they are reinforced by an unseen continuity. Emotionally, morphogenetic fields blur the line between memory and reality. The past is not gone, it is active, shaping the present from beneath awareness. Habits, instincts, and repeated structures begin to feel less accidental and more like echoes. This concept invites you to see repetition differently. When something keeps returning, it may not be coincidence or failure. It may be a field-pulling experience toward familiar shapes, asking either to be reinforced or finally disrupted through conscious attention. Apophatic knowing. Apophatic knowing is the understanding that the deepest truths cannot be reached by adding more explanations, but by stripping them away. It is knowledge through negation, where clarity emerges not from defining what something is, but from recognizing everything it is not. The mind is slowly led to the edge of its own limits, where language begins to fail. What makes apophatic knowing emotionally intense is the discomfort it creates in a culture obsessed with answers. We are trained to believe that insight comes from accumulation, from clarity, from naming and categorizing. Apophatic knowing demands the opposite. It asks you to release certainty, to let familiar concepts dissolve, and to remain present as understanding becomes wordless and unstable. This process can feel like losing ground. As explanations fall away, the ego reacts with anxiety because it depends on narratives to feel secure. The absence of definition can feel like emptiness or confusion, yet something subtle begins to surface in that silence. Meaning is no longer grasped, it is sensed. Emotionally, apophatic knowing invites humility. It confronts the need to be right, to master, to dominate reality through comprehension. In its place, it offers a quieter form of intimacy. You stop standing over truth and begin standing within it, without the distance that language usually creates. Apophatic knowing also changes how mystery is felt. Mystery is no longer a problem waiting to be solved, but a presence that deepens the more you stop trying to reduce it. The mind learns to rest in not knowing without collapsing into despair. In that resting, something opens, not as an answer, but as a direct, undeniable awareness beyond explanation. Ontological indeterminacy. Ontological indeterminacy is the idea that being itself may not be fully settled or fixed. It suggests that reality, at its deepest level, is not composed of clearly defined entities with stable identities, but of conditions that remain partially unresolved. Existence is not finished. It is still in the process of becoming what it is. What makes this concept emotionally destabilizing is how directly it challenges the need for solid ground. We depend on the belief that things are what they are, that beneath change there is something firm to stand on. Ontological indeterminacy removes that reassurance. It implies that uncertainty is not just a limitation of knowledge, but a feature of reality itself. Emotionally, this can trigger unease and vulnerability. If being is indeterminate, then identity becomes less reliable. You are not uncovering a fixed self over time. You are participating in an ongoing formation. The question, "Who am I?" stops having a final answer. Instead, it becomes an open tension that never fully resolves. This concept also reframes control. If reality itself is not fully determined, then prediction becomes provisional and mastery incomplete. Plans, systems, and explanations begin to feel fragile. Yet within this fragility, there is a strange sense of openness. The future is not merely unknown, it is genuinely undecided. Ontological indeterminacy carries an emotional weight that oscillates between anxiety and freedom. The loss of absolute certainty can feel like standing on shifting ground, but it also means that existence is not locked into rigid outcomes. What is still becoming has room to change, and that instability quietly reshapes how hope, fear, and responsibility are felt. Non-local identity. Non-local identity is the idea that the self is not confined to a single point in space, a single body, or a single moment in time. It suggests that who you are cannot be fully located where you think you are. The boundaries that define me may be more like conveniences than facts, drawn for survival rather than accuracy. What makes non-local identity emotionally destabilizing is that it quietly dissolves the sense of ownership over the self. You feel as though your thoughts, memories, and emotions belong to you alone. Yet this concept implies that identity may be distributed, shaped by relationships, environments, histories, and unseen influences that extend far beyond your physical presence. Parts of you may exist where you are not. This idea reframes intimacy and separation. If identity is non-local, then connection is not something added to an already complete self, but something that actively constitutes it. The people who shaped you, the places that marked you, and the moments that altered your trajectory are not merely remembered. They are still participating in who you are. Loss becomes more complex because what leaves your life may never fully leave your identity. Emotionally, non-local identity can feel both threatening and comforting. Threatening because it weakens the illusion of autonomy and control. Comforting because it suggests you are not as alone as you feel. Your existence does not end at your skin. You are extended, echoed, and carried in ways you cannot fully track. This concept invites a quiet unease. If the self is spread out across the world, then knowing who you are becomes less about introspection and more about sensing the invisible threads that hold you together. Event ontology. Event ontology is the idea that reality is not made of stable things, but of happenings. What you call objects, identities, and structures are temporary patterns within a continuous flow of events. Nothing truly is in the static sense. Everything is something that is occurring, unfolding, and passing through a moment of coherence before changing again. What makes this idea emotionally destabilizing is how it undermines the sense of permanence you depend on. You experience yourself as a solid entity moving through time, yet event ontology suggests you are closer to a process than a thing. Your body, your thoughts, your personality are not fixed possessions, but ongoing events that only appear stable because they repeat. This reframing can feel unsettling because it removes the illusion of something to hold on to. If everything is an event, then there is no unchanging core behind experience, only continuity without permanence. The self becomes something that happens, not something that endures untouched beneath change. Emotionally, event ontology sharpens awareness of impermanence. Moments become more vivid because they are no longer replaceable. Each experience is a brief convergence of conditions that will never assemble in exactly the same way again. Presence gains weight because it is always already dissolving. At the same time, this view can feel strangely freeing. If identity is an event, then it is not frozen by past definitions. You are not bound to be the same thing you were before. You are an unfolding, and with every moment, the event that is you is already becoming something else. Cosmic memory. Cosmic memory is the idea that the universe, in some form, remembers itself, not as a conscious mind recalling events, but as reality carrying traces of everything that has ever occurred, woven into its structure. Nothing is fully lost. Every action, pattern, and transformation leaves an imprint that continues to influence what comes next. What makes cosmic memory emotionally haunting is the implication that time does not simply erase. Moments you believe are gone may still echo beneath the surface of existence. The past is not dead. It is folded into the present, shaping it quietly and persistently. This challenges the comforting belief that pain, failure, or trauma can disappear without residue. Emotionally, cosmic memory reframes significance. If reality remembers, then nothing is entirely meaningless. Even the smallest experiences participate in a larger continuity. This can feel overwhelming. as if every moment carries more weight than you realized. It also carries tenderness, suggesting that what mattered to you was not simply swallowed by time. This concept also alters how repetition is felt. Patterns that resurface across history, cultures, or personal lives may not be coincidence, but memory expressing itself through form. You are not just reacting to the present, you are responding to accumulated layers of what has already been lived. Cosmic memory blurs the boundary between personal and universal experience. Your memories feel private, yet they may be local expressions of something far larger. Emotionally, this can evoke both intimacy and exposure. Nothing is fully forgotten, but nothing is entirely alone either. The universe, in this view, is not a blank stage resetting each moment. It is a body marked by its own history, carrying everything forward, quietly remembering even when no one is watching. Temporal thickness. Temporal thickness is the idea that moments are not thin, fleeting points that vanish as soon as they appear, but layered, dense, and internally rich. Each present moment contains depth, carrying traces of the past and pressures of the future within it. Time, in this view, does not simply pass, it accumulates, folds, and lingers. What makes temporal thickness emotionally gripping is that it changes how you relate to memory and anticipation. A moment of grief, love, or fear does not exist in isolation. It is saturated with echoes of earlier moments and shaped by expectations of what might come next. This explains why certain experiences feel heavy, as if they contain more than the present can hold. You are not just feeling now, you are feeling accumulated time. This concept quietly destabilizes the idea of clean transitions. You tell yourself that chapters end and new ones begin, yet temporal thickness suggests that nothing fully ends. Past moments continue to press into the present, influencing perception, emotion, and reaction, even when you believe you have moved on. The past is not behind you. It is inside the moment you are inhabiting. Emotionally, temporal thickness can feel oppressive or intimate. Oppressive because it reveals why release is so difficult. Intimate because it means your experiences are not lost to time as quickly as they seem. Moments of meaning persist, layered into your perception, shaping how the world feels long after they occur. This idea invites a subtle shift in awareness. Instead of chasing the present as something fragile and disappearing, you begin to sense it as something dense and resonant, a place where multiple times coexist, pressing gently but relentlessly against your awareness. Self-other collapse. Self-other collapse is the experience where the boundary separating me from you begins to erode, not as an idea, but as a felt shift in perception. It is the moment when the distinction between observer and observed loses its sharpness, and the sense of being a sealed, independent center starts to blur. What remains is not confusion, but an unsettling intimacy with everything around you. What makes self-other collapse emotionally intense is how deeply it threatens personal identity. The self is built through contrast. You know who you are because you know who you are not. When that contrast weakens, the mind reacts with fear because the structures that create safety, ownership, and control begin to dissolve. It can feel like losing ground, like standing without edges. At the same time, there is a strange relief in this collapse. The effort required to constantly defend the self relaxes. Emotional walls soften. Other people's joy, pain, and presence stop feeling distant and begin to feel strangely familiar. Empathy no longer feels like an action you perform, but a condition you find yourself inside. This collapse also destabilizes blame and superiority. If the line between self and other is thinner than assumed, then judgment becomes harder to sustain. The suffering of others no longer feels abstract. Their fear resonates too closely. Their actions feel less foreign. Emotionally, self-other collapse can feel overwhelming because it removes the insulation you rely on to stay untouched. Yet within that vulnerability lies a quiet transformation, where connection stops being something you seek and starts being something you cannot fully escape. Metaphysical latency. Metaphysical latency is the idea that existence holds far more than what is currently visible, active, or expressed. Reality is not exhausted by what appears. Beneath every form, event, or moment lies a depth of unrealized potential, waiting, suspended, neither present nor absent, but poised to emerge under the right conditions. What makes metaphysical latency emotionally gripping is the way it reframes absence. What seems missing, delayed, or unrealized is not necessarily empty. It may be latent, held in reserve by reality itself. This challenges the painful assumption that what has not happened is simply lost or impossible. Instead, it suggests that some aspects of being require time, pressure, or alignment before they can surface. Emotionally, this concept resonates with the feeling of being unfinished. The sense that something within you has not yet arrived, that certain capacities, understandings, or transformations remain dormant. Metaphysical latency offers a language for that quiet tension. It implies that incompleteness is not failure, but a state of readiness. This idea also destabilizes urgency. In a world obsessed with immediacy, latency insists that delay can be meaningful. Not everything emerges when demanded. Some truths resist acceleration, unfolding only when the conditions are precise enough to sustain them. Metaphysical latency carries a subtle emotional weight of patience and ache. It asks you to live alongside what has not yet shown itself without forcing it into premature form. The unseen is not nothing. It is held, compressed, and alive beneath the surface of reality, shaping the present, even while remaining hidden. Proto-intentionality. Proto-intentionality is the idea that purpose does not suddenly appear with conscious minds, but exists in a faint, pre-mental form woven into reality itself. It suggests that direction, tendency, and orientation toward outcomes precede thought, choice, and deliberate intention. Before you decide, before you know, something is already leaning. What makes proto-intentionality emotionally unsettling is that it weakens the feeling of authorship over your actions. You experience yourself as the origin of decisions, yet this concept implies that intention may arise from deeper patterns already in motion. Choices feel personal, but they may be the surface expression of underlying orientations that were never consciously chosen. This idea reframes instinct, impulse, and intuition. The sudden pull toward or away from something may not be irrational or accidental, but a continuation of a deeper directional force operating beneath awareness. Even matter, in its most basic forms, may exhibit tendencies rather than randomness. The universe, in this sense, is not neutral. It is quietly biased toward certain unfoldings. Emotionally, proto-intentionality can feel threatening because it suggests that freedom is not absolute. Yet it can also feel relieving because it implies you are not creating meaning from nothing. You are participating in a movement that existed before you recognized it. Effort becomes alignment rather than force. This concept introduces a subtle tension between control and surrender. If intention begins before thought, then understanding yourself is less about deciding who you will be and more about noticing what is already trying to happen through you, quietly shaping direction long before you give it a name. Archetypal gravity. Archetypal gravity is the idea that certain patterns, images, and meanings exert a pull on human experience the way mass pulls matter. Long before conscious choice enters the picture, these deep symbolic structures draw thoughts, emotions, and behaviors toward familiar shapes. You do not merely choose your paths. Some paths feel as though they are choosing you. What makes archetypal gravity emotionally compelling is the sense of inevitability it introduces. You may believe you are acting freely, yet certain themes keep repeating in your life. The same conflicts, the same desires, the same roles. This repetition can feel personal, even fated, as if something older than you is quietly steering the direction of your becoming. This concept unsettles the belief that identity is fully self-authored. Archetypal gravity suggests that beneath your personal story are universal patterns pulling experience into recognizable forms. The hero, the exile, the caretaker, the destroyer, the seeker. You may resist these roles, yet they reassert themselves in new disguises, shaping your emotional landscape. Emotionally, this idea can be both validating and unsettling. Validating because it implies your struggles are not random failures, but expressions of deep, shared structures of meaning. Unsettling because it suggests escape is not as simple as deciding differently. Some patterns have weight. Archetypal gravity also reframes inner conflict. When you feel torn between impulses, it may not be indecision, but competing forces pulling from different symbolic depths. Awareness does not remove the pull, but it allows you to feel it, name it, and decide whether to orbit its influence or deliberately resist its attraction. Being as relation. Being as relation is the idea that nothing exists on its own, not even you. Existence is not a self-contained substance, but a web of relationships that continuously bring things into presence. To be is not to stand alone, but to be in contact, in tension, in response. Without relation, there is no being to point to. What makes this concept emotionally destabilizing is how deeply it disrupts the sense of independence. We are taught to experience ourselves as separate units, bounded and self-sufficient, yet being as relation suggests that the self only exists through ongoing interaction. Remove the relationships, and the solidity of identity begins to dissolve. Emotionally, this can feel threatening. If who you are depends on connection, then loss, rejection, or isolation strike deeper than expected. They do not merely remove something external, they alter the structure of your being. At the same time, this realization can be profoundly affirming. It means you are not required to carry existence alone. Your presence is sustained by countless visible and invisible ties. Being as relation also changes how responsibility is felt. Actions no longer end at the boundary of intention. Every movement reverberates through the network that makes you who you are. You are shaped by others, and you shape them in return, often without awareness. Emotionally, this concept invites vulnerability. To exist is to be exposed, influenced, and open to change. There is no untouched core hiding behind relationships. You are already entangled. What you call self is not a fixed point, but a living pattern of connections, constantly reforming as the world responds to you and you respond back. Time as emergent illusion. Time as emergent illusion is the idea that time is not a fundamental feature of reality, but a byproduct of deeper processes that only appear temporal from within them. It suggests that past, present, and future are not basic ingredients of existence, but mental and relational constructs that arise when change is experienced from a limited perspective. Time feels absolute because you are embedded in it, not because it truly exists as you perceive it. What makes this concept emotionally disorienting is that it undermines the most reliable structure you use to orient your life. Memory, identity, goals, and meaning all rely on the flow of time. If time is emergent rather than fundamental, then the sense of moving forward may be more like a narrative than a fact. The feeling of becoming someone over time starts to look like an interpretation layered onto something deeper and motionless. This idea reframes anxiety and regret. Worry depends on the future being real in advance, and regret depends on the past being gone. If time is an illusion generated by perspective, then the emotional grip of what was and what will be loosens. The weight of anticipation and memory begins to feel less solid, more like echoes than destinations. Emotionally, this concept can feel destabilizing or strangely calming. Destabilizing because it removes the certainty of progression. Calming because it hints that nothing is truly lost and nothing is fully pending. Everything you experience may already be complete in a way you cannot perceive. Time as emergent illusion invites a quiet unease. If time is not fundamental, then the urgency you feel may be a feature of perception rather than reality itself. Observer-dependent reality. Observer-dependent reality is the idea that what exists, how it appears, and what it becomes are inseparable from the act of observation itself. Reality is not a finished structure waiting to be discovered, but something that takes shape through interaction with awareness. What you perceive is not simply revealed to you, it is partially brought into being by the way you look. What makes this idea emotionally unsettling is the responsibility it implies. If observation matters, then you are never just a passive witness to the world. Your attention, expectations, and interpretations subtly shape what becomes real for you and, in some cases, for others as well. This destabilizes the comfort of believing that truth exists completely independent of perspective. Emotionally, observer-dependent reality challenges the sense of objectivity you rely on to feel grounded. If reality shifts with observation, then certainty becomes fragile. Two people can occupy the same space and inhabit entirely different worlds, each one real in its own way. This can feel isolating, as if there is no single ground everyone stands on together. At the same time, this concept carries a quiet sense of power. If perception participates in reality, then change may begin not only with action, but with attention. What you consistently notice grows more vivid. What you ignore fades. Your inner state becomes a lens that reshapes experience moment by moment. This idea also intensifies self-awareness. You are forced to confront how often you mistake your perspective for reality itself. Observer-dependent reality does not say that nothing exists without you, but that nothing appears to you without you shaping it in some way, whether consciously or not. Nested selves. Nested selves is the idea that identity is layered, not singular. You are not one unified self moving through the world, but a constellation of selves contained within one another, each emerging in different contexts, moments, and emotional states. None of them are false, yet none of them are complete on their own. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is how it disrupts the desire for a stable core. We often search for the real self beneath our roles, moods, and contradictions, hoping to find something consistent and permanent. Nested selves suggests that this core may not exist as a single thing. Instead, identity functions more like depth than like a point. Emotionally, this explains the quiet exhaustion of trying to be consistent. The self that feels authentic in solitude may feel alien in public. The self that emerges in love may disappear under pressure. Rather than indicating deception or weakness, nested selves frames this as the natural structure of consciousness responding to different relational environments. This idea also challenges guilt and self-judgment. When conflicting impulses arise, it is not necessarily failure or hypocrisy. It may be different layers of self-surfacing at different depths. Understanding this can soften the internal struggle to reconcile every contradiction into a single narrative. Nested selves also carry an emotional loneliness. If identity is layered, then no one ever encounters all of you at once. Parts remain unseen, even by yourself. Yet within that fragmentation is richness. You are more than any version you perform or remember. Identity is not something you possess. It is something that unfolds inward and outward at the same time, endlessly layered, endlessly responsive. Recursive consciousness. Recursive consciousness is the idea that awareness does not simply exist, but repeatedly turns back on itself, observing its own observing. You are not only conscious of the world, you are conscious that you are conscious and aware that you are aware of that awareness. This looping structure creates the layered inner experience you identify as a self. What makes recursive consciousness emotionally intense is that it exposes how fragile and constructed the sense of identity really is. The feeling of being a stable I emerges from these feedback loops, not from a single solid core. When attention folds inward, consciousness becomes both the observer and the observed, creating an echo that feels like depth, continuity, and presence. This concept reframes overthinking and self-reflection. The endless internal commentary, the sense of watching yourself think and feel, is not a malfunction but an expression of recursion. Awareness spirals inward, generating meaning, doubt, and narrative as it repeatedly references itself. The more tightly this loop closes, the more intense the sense of self becomes. Emotionally, recursive consciousness can feel claustrophobic. There is no clear exit from the loop of experience, no external vantage point from which to observe yourself without also being involved. Attempts to escape thought often produce more thought, reinforcing the recursion rather than breaking it. At the same time, this idea carries a quiet release. If the self is generated by recursive awareness, then loosening attention weakens the loop. Moments of stillness, absorption, or awe interrupt the feedback, revealing a simpler form of awareness beneath the layers. Recursive consciousness invites you to notice not just what you experience, but how experience keeps recreating itself through you, moment after moment. The unconditioned. The unconditioned refers to that which exists without cause, dependence, or prerequisite. It is not shaped by circumstances, time, or prior events. Everything you normally understand is conditioned by something else, influenced, formed, limited. The unconditioned stands outside that chain entirely, untouched by becoming, change, or explanation. What makes this idea emotionally disquieting is how foreign it feels to the human mind. You understand yourself through causes, your past, your choices, your environment. To encounter the idea of something that does not rely on any of these is to confront a reality that cannot be negotiated with, improved, or escaped. It does not respond because it does not need to. Emotionally, the unconditioned can feel like both refuge and threat. A refuge because it suggests there is something stable beneath all fluctuation, something that cannot be damaged by loss or chaos. A threat because it undermines the belief that everything can be influenced or understood. Control dissolves in its presence. This concept also exposes the exhaustion of conditioning. Every desire arises because of lack, every fear because of memory, every hope because of projection. The unconditioned represents a state where none of this applies. There is no striving, no deficiency, no movement toward fulfillment. For the self, this can feel deeply destabilizing. If something exists that is not conditioned, then your identity, built entirely from conditions, is revealed as provisional. The unconditioned does not oppose your experience, but it quietly relativizes it, suggesting that beneath all effort and narrative, there may be a reality that simply is, without needing to become anything else. Ontological groundlessness. Ontological groundlessness is the idea that there is no final foundation beneath existence, no ultimate base upon which reality securely rests. The structures you rely on for meaning, identity, and certainty do not descend to a solid core. Instead, they rest on conditions that themselves have no deeper guarantee. Being has no bedrock. What makes this concept emotionally disorienting is the way it confronts the need for stability. We assume that if we dig deep enough, there will be something firm to hold on to, a truth, a self, a principle that cannot be shaken. Ontological groundlessness denies this comfort. It suggests that even the deepest explanations eventually give way to nothing fixed beneath them. Emotionally, this can trigger anxiety, vertigo, or a sense of free fall. Without a ground, the mind scrambles to rebuild certainty through belief, ideology, or control. The fear is not just of confusion, but of meaninglessness. If nothing ultimately supports existence, then why does anything hold together at all? Yet within this unease there is a strange freedom. If there is no absolute ground, then nothing is permanently trapped by its foundation. Identities, systems, and narratives lose their claim to inevitability. What feels oppressive can loosen its grip when it is no longer anchored to an unquestionable base. Ontological groundlessness reshapes trust. Instead of trusting in foundations, it asks for trust in movement, continuity, and responsiveness. Reality persists without guarantee, moment by moment. There is no final answer holding everything up, only the ongoing fact that being continues, unsupported, unfolding, and somehow still here. The eternal now. The eternal now is the idea that reality is not truly divided into past, present, and future, but exists as a single continuous presence that never moves. What you experience as time flowing may be the mind slicing something indivisible into manageable segments. Beneath that division, there is only this, unchanging, ever-present, and complete. What makes the eternal now emotionally unsettling is how directly it confronts the sense of urgency you live by. Your fears depend on what might happen, your regrets on what already happened, Yet this concept suggests that both are mental overlays placed on a reality that is always fully here. If the eternal now is real, then nothing is actually arriving or leaving. Everything is already present, even if you cannot perceive it all at once. This idea destabilizes identity. You understand yourself as someone moving through time, becoming older, changing, accumulating experiences. The eternal now implies that this movement is experiential, not ontological. The version of you remember and the version you anticipate are not gone or not yet. They are different perspectives within the same timeless field. Change happens, but not because reality itself moves. Emotionally, the eternal now can feel suffocating or liberating. Suffocating because there is no escape into a better future moment. Liberating because there is also no final loss into the past. Nothing essential is ever truly absent. The ache of waiting and the pain of missing soften when time stops feeling like a conveyor belt dragging you forward. This concept reframes presence. Being in the moment is no longer a technique or practice, but a recognition. You were never outside the now to begin with. The effort to arrive dissolves, leaving only the strange realization that what you have been chasing has been holding you the entire time. Process philosophy. Process philosophy is the view that reality is not made of static substances, but of continuous becoming. Nothing truly exists as a fixed thing. Everything is in motion, defined by change rather than permanence. What appears solid is only a momentary stabilization within an ongoing flow. Being is secondary to becoming. What makes this idea emotionally unsettling is how it destabilizes the sense of security that comes from fixed identities. You rely on the belief that you are fundamentally the same person over time, yet process philosophy suggests that this continuity is more like a narrative than a fact. You are not something that changes. You are change happening in a coherent pattern. Emotionally, this can feel exhausting at first. If nothing is fixed, then there is no final ground to stand on. Every achievement, belief, and relationship exists in a state of ongoing transformation. Stability becomes temporary, not guaranteed. The self is no longer a possession, but an activity. At the same time, process philosophy introduces a subtle sense of relief. If reality is process, then stagnation is an illusion. You are not failing because you are unfinished. You are unfinished because that is what existence is. Growth is not an exception to the rule. It is the rule itself. This view also reshapes responsibility. If everything is becoming, then every moment matters because it participates in shaping what comes next. You are not bound by what you were, but you are shaped by what you repeatedly enact. Process philosophy removes the fantasy of permanence and replaces it with something more demanding and more alive, a reality that is always in motion and always being made. Reality as language. Reality as language is the idea that the world does not merely contain meaning, but operates through it. Existence unfolds as a system of signs, patterns, and relations that function like a living grammar. Things do not just happen, they communicate. To perceive reality is already to interpret it, whether consciously or not. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is the realization that there may be no raw, uninterpreted world behind experience. If reality behaves like language, then everything you encounter is already structured, mediated, and shaped by relations of meaning. The hope of accessing a purely objective what is begins to fade, replaced by the awareness that understanding is always happening from within a system of interpretation. Emotionally, this can create both fascination and mistrust. If reality speaks, then you are constantly being addressed by it. Events, coincidences, and patterns begin to feel charged, as if they are saying something without using words. At the same time, this raises unease. If meaning is everywhere, how do you know which meanings are real and which are projections? Reality as language also destabilizes authority. No single perspective owns the grammar of existence. Interpretations compete, overlap, and shift depending on context. What feels true in one moment can dissolve in another, not because reality changed, but because the relational structure through which it is read has shifted. Emotionally, this concept draws you into participation. You are not a passive observer decoding a fixed message. You are part of the language itself, shaping meaning as you move through it. Every perception becomes an act of translation, and every action subtly rewrites the world you think you are merely describing. Non-dual awareness. Non-dual awareness is the recognition that the division between observer and observed is not ultimately real. It suggests that the sense of being a separate self looking out at an external world is a perceptual habit rather than a fundamental truth. Experience is happening, but there is no clear boundary where you end and everything else begins. What makes non-dual awareness emotionally destabilizing is how quietly it undermines identity. You rely on contrast to know who you are, inside versus outside, thinker versus thought, experiencer versus experience. Non-dual awareness softens these lines until they become transparent. Thoughts arise, sensations appear, emotions move, but there is no solid center orchestrating them. This can feel like losing the ground beneath your feet, because the self you depend on for orientation begins to feel optional. This idea reframes suffering. Pain is no longer something happening to a separate entity, but an experience unfolding within the same field as everything else. Resistance weakens when there is no longer a someone to defend. This does not make experience disappear, but it changes its texture. Emotional contraction loosens when ownership dissolves. Emotionally, non-dual awareness can feel deeply intimate or deeply threatening. Intimate, because nothing is distant anymore. Threatening, because the familiar sense of control fades. There is no place to stand outside experience and manage it. Life happens without a manager. This concept also challenges seeking. If awareness is already non-dual, then searching for unity reinforces separation. The effort to arrive becomes the obstacle. Recognition replaces achievement. What you are looking for is not hidden, but overlooked, because it is too close, too immediate, too ordinary. Non-dual awareness invites a subtle but radical shift. Experience continues exactly as before, yet the feeling of being trapped inside it loosens, revealing a quiet openness where nothing is excluded and nothing needs to be added. Existence as self-interpretation. Existence as self-interpretation is the idea that reality does not simply exist as a fixed given, but continuously interprets itself through the forms it takes. To exist is not only to be present, but to express, translate, and make sense of oneself from within. Meaning is not added afterward, it emerges as part of the act of existing. What makes this idea emotionally gripping is how it reframes your own life. You are not merely living through events, you are constantly interpreting what it means to be you. Your choices, reactions, and stories are not decorations placed on top of existence. They are how existence becomes intelligible through you. This places you inside meaning rather than outside it. Emotionally, this dissolves the comfort of neutrality. There is no purely objective standpoint where you simply observe your life without shaping it. Every experience is filtered, framed, and understood through interpretation, whether you are aware of it or not. Even silence becomes a form of interpretation. This concept also destabilizes the idea of a final truth about who you are. If existence is self-interpretation, then identity is never finished. You are always in the process of telling yourself what you are, and that story subtly reshapes the reality you inhabit. The self becomes both author and text at the same time. Emotionally, this can feel heavy. If meaning is not discovered but enacted, then responsibility cannot be avoided. You cannot step outside interpretation. You are always already interpreting, always participating in the unfolding sense of your own existence, whether consciously, carelessly, or with deliberate intent. Participatory cosmos. Participatory cosmos is the idea that the universe is not something that exists independently of observers, but something that comes into form through interaction, attention, and engagement. Reality is not fully formed until it is encountered. To exist is not enough. Things must be participated in to become real in a meaningful sense. What makes this concept emotionally provocative is how it shifts responsibility. If the cosmos is participatory, then you are not just living inside reality, you are helping shape it. Your attention, choices, and interpretations are not neutral. They feed back into the structure of what appears. This can feel empowering, but also unsettling, because it implies that disengagement is never harmless. Emotionally, participatory cosmos challenges passivity. You cannot stand outside events as a detached witness. Even indifference becomes a form of participation. The world responds not only to action, but to what is noticed, ignored, valued, or dismissed. This gives everyday moments a quiet gravity. Nothing is entirely inconsequential. This idea also reframes meaning. Meaning is not preloaded into the universe, waiting to be discovered. It emerges through relationship. When you engage deeply, reality becomes richer and more defined. When you withdraw, it thins out, losing texture and depth. Participatory cosmos dissolves the boundary between observer and observed. You are not looking at a finished universe, you are co-creating the conditions under which it appears. Emotionally, this can feel like being called into dialogue with existence itself. The cosmos is not silent. It answers through the very act of your involvement, shaping itself as you respond. Being before thought. Being before thought is the idea that existence does not arise from thinking, labeling, or understanding, but precedes all mental activity. Before concepts form, before language divides experience, before the mind names what is happening, there is already presence. Thought does not create reality. It arrives late, describing something that is already there. What makes this concept emotionally disarming is how deeply it challenges the habit of identifying with the mind. You often experience yourself as the voice in your head, the narrator explaining what is happening. Being before thought suggests that this voice is not the source of you, but an overlay. When thinking pauses, even briefly, you do not disappear. Something remains, quietly aware and undeniably present. This idea reframes silence. Moments without thought are often mistaken for emptiness or absence, yet they reveal a more basic mode of existence. There is a subtle relief in recognizing that you do not have to constantly interpret reality to remain intact. Presence does not depend on explanation. It holds itself without effort. Emotionally, being before thought can feel both unsettling and soothing. Unsettling because it weakens the sense of control that comes from understanding. Soothing because it removes the pressure to constantly define yourself and your experience. You are not required to keep up a narrative in order to exist. This concept also shifts how you relate to uncertainty. If being does not depend on clarity, then not knowing is no longer a failure. Confusion loses its threat when existence itself is already secure. Thought becomes a tool rather than a foundation. Being before thought invites you to notice what remains when the mind momentarily falls quiet. Not an idea, not a conclusion, but a simple, undeniable fact of presence that was there long before you thought to look for it. Causal loops. Causal loops describe situations where cause and effect no longer move in a straight line, but fold back on themselves. An event becomes both the result of a cause and the cause of itself. The future influences the past. The outcome shapes the origin, and linear explanation begins to break down. What happens cannot be cleanly traced to a single starting point. What makes causal loops emotionally disturbing is how they undermine the sense of temporal control. You rely on the belief that actions come first and consequences follow. Causal loops blur that order. They suggest that some outcomes are already shaping the conditions that give rise to them. Choice begins to feel entangled with inevitability. Emotionally, this can trigger a quiet anxiety. If effects can influence causes, then where does responsibility truly begin? The feeling of being trapped in repeating patterns gains a metaphysical weight. You may feel as though certain outcomes keep reappearing not because you failed to change them, but because they are already woven into the structure of how events unfold. Causal loops also destabilize the idea of a clean origin story. There may be no first mistake, no initial trauma, no single moment that explains everything. Instead, experiences reinforce themselves over time, creating self-sustaining cycles of belief, behavior, and consequence. At a deeper level, causal loops blur the boundary between freedom and fate. You act, but your actions are shaped by conditions those actions help maintain. This creates a strange emotional tension where change feels possible yet constrained, as if you are both author and product of the same unfolding pattern, unable to fully step outside it. Identity as narrative. Identity as narrative is the idea that who you are is not a fixed essence, but a story continually being told, revised, and reinforced over time. The self is not discovered like an object. It is constructed through memory, language, and interpretation. You exist as a sequence of meanings tied together by coherence rather than permanence. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is how fragile identity becomes under scrutiny. If you are a story, then your sense of self depends on which moments you remember, how you interpret them, and what you choose to emphasize or suppress. Change the story, and the self shifts. This realization can feel destabilizing, as if the ground of who you are could be rewritten at any moment. Emotionally, identity as narrative explains the pain of being misunderstood. When others misinterpret your actions, it feels like they are distorting your very existence. It also explains the quiet power of reflection. When you retell your past differently, your present self begins to change with it. This idea also exposes the weight of repetition. The more a story is told, internally or externally, the more real it becomes. Patterns harden into traits. Temporary reactions solidify into, "This is just who I am." Over time, the narrative begins to feel inevitable, even though it was shaped through countless small choices of emphasis. Identity as narrative carries both confinement and freedom. You can become trapped in stories that no longer serve you, yet the very fact that identity is narrative means it is never fully closed. As long as the story continues, there is room for reinterpretation, revision, and unexpected meaning to emerge. The void as fullness. The void as fullness is the idea that what appears empty, absent, or nothing at all is not lacking, but saturated beyond form. It suggests that emptiness is not a deficit, but a condition of unlimited potential, where nothing is defined because everything is possible. What you perceive as void is not a gap in reality, but its deepest density. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is how it inverts instinctive fear. The mind associates emptiness with loss, abandonment, or annihilation. Silence feels uncomfortable, stillness feels wrong, and absence feels threatening. The void as fullness suggests that these reactions are misunderstandings driven by the need for form and reference. When familiar structures fall away, what remains is not nothing, but something too open to be grasped. This idea reframes moments of inner emptiness. The hollow feeling after loss, collapse, or disillusionment is usually treated as something to escape. Yet this concept implies that such moments may be encounters with a deeper layer of reality, one that has not yet crystallized into meaning. The discomfort arises not because there is nothing there, but because there is no shape for the mind to hold on to. Emotionally, the void as fullness can feel terrifying or deeply peaceful. Terrifying because identity dissolves when there is nothing to define it. Peaceful because the pressure to be something relaxes. There is no demand, no direction, no requirement to perform or become. This concept challenges the assumption that value comes from content. It suggests that openness itself is sustaining, that silence can be nourishing, and that the space between things is not a lack, but the quiet source from which all form continuously emerges. Infinite regress of causes. Infinite regress of causes is the idea that for every cause you identify, there is always another cause behind it, and another behind that, with no ultimate starting point. Every explanation demands a deeper explanation. Every origin points to something prior. The search for a first cause becomes an endless descent with no final ground. What makes this idea emotionally unsettling is the way it erodes the comfort of closure. The mind longs for foundations, for something solid it can point to and say, "This is where it all begins." Infinite regress denies that satisfaction. It suggests that reality may not rest on a single reason, intention, or origin, but on an endless chain of dependence. Emotionally, this can produce a quiet vertigo. The more you ask why, the less stable the answer becomes. Meaning feels as though it keeps slipping just out of reach. The sense that everything must ultimately make sense begins to weaken, replaced by the possibility that explanation itself has limits. This concept also destabilizes blame and responsibility. If every action is the result of prior conditions, which themselves were caused by earlier ones, then guilt and praise become harder to locate. You begin to sense how deeply entangled choice is with circumstance, how little emerges from a truly isolated point. At a deeper emotional level, infinite regress of causes confronts the fear that there may be no final justification for existence. Things happen because other things happened before them, not because they were meant to. This does not negate meaning, but it forces meaning to exist without a final anchor, suspended in an ongoing chain that never fully arrives at an answer. Substrate independence. Substrate independence is the idea that what truly matters about a thing is not the material it is made of, but the pattern or organization it expresses. The same structure, function, or experience can arise across different physical forms, suggesting that essence is not tied to any single substance, being is not bound to its container. What makes this concept emotionally provocative is how it destabilizes attachment to form. We often equate identity with the body, the brain, or specific circumstances, yet substrate independence implies that what you experience as you could in principle persist through radically different foundations. This raises a quiet unease about how fragile the things you cling to may be, and how transferable they might actually be. Emotionally, substrate independence stretches the imagination beyond mortality and limitation. If patterns matter more than matter, then loss does not always mean erasure. Continuity may take unfamiliar shapes. At the same time, this thought can feel unsettling because it loosens the sense of uniqueness tied to a particular body or moment. If patterns repeat, what makes this instance special? This idea also reframes change. When circumstances shift, you are not necessarily becoming someone else. The underlying organization of habits, values, and awareness may be re-expressing itself through a new medium. This can soften fear around transformation, while also revealing how little control you have over the forms that carry you. Substrate independence invites an emotional tension between permanence and impermanence. What you are may endure as pattern, yet no single form is guaranteed. Identity becomes something that flows across structures, leaving the comfort of solidity behind, without offering complete certainty in return. Meaning as fundamental. Meaning as fundamental is the idea that meaning is not something humans invent after the fact, but something woven into the structure of reality itself. It suggests that existence is not neutral matter waiting to be interpreted, but already oriented, already expressive, already leaning toward significance before anyone notices it. What makes this concept emotionally gripping is that it reverses the fear that life is ultimately meaningless. You are taught, directly or indirectly, that meaning is fragile, subjective, and dependent on belief. Meaning as fundamental suggests the opposite, that meaning precedes interpretation, and that your search for purpose is not an imposition on reality, but a resonance with something already there. This idea destabilizes nihilism at its root. If meaning is fundamental, then despair does not arise from a meaningless world, but from disconnection from meaning's deeper currents. The emptiness you feel at times may not be evidence that nothing matters, but a signal that you are out of alignment with something that does. Emotionally, this concept can feel confronting because it removes the excuse of randomness. If meaning is built into existence, then your experiences are not merely accidents. Even confusion, suffering, and contradiction may participate in a larger intelligibility that does not immediately reveal itself. This can feel heavy, as if reality is quietly asking something of you. At the same time, meaning as fundamental can feel deeply reassuring. You are not tasked with inventing purpose from nothing. Attention becomes discovery rather than construction. Living becomes an act of listening, sensing where significance is already gathering, and allowing yourself to be shaped by it, even when clarity has not yet arrived. World as appearance. World as appearance is the idea that the world you experience is not reality in itself, but reality as it appears through perception, cognition, and interpretation. What you encounter is already shaped by the structures of your mind, your senses, and your expectations. The world is never given raw, it is always filtered, framed, and presented. What makes this idea emotionally destabilizing is the loss of immediacy it implies. You move through life believing you are in direct contact with reality, yet world as appearance suggests you are always one step removed. This creates a subtle unease, a sense that something fundamental is always just beyond reach, no matter how closely you look. Emotionally, this challenges trust in experience. If the world is appearance, then certainty becomes fragile. What you see, feel, and believe may not reflect reality as it is, only reality as it shows up for you. This can feel isolating, as if you are confined within your own perspective, unable to fully step outside it. At the same time, this idea introduces a strange intimacy. The world you live in is not separate from you. It arises through your way of encountering it. Your fears, desires, and assumptions do not just color experience, they help constitute it. The world feels the way it does because of how you meet it. World as appearance quietly suggests that transformation does not always require changing the world itself. Sometimes it requires changing the conditions under which the world appears to you, knowing that reality and perception are never entirely apart. Mind-matter continuum. Mind-matter continuum is the idea that mind and matter are not two separate substances, but different expressions along the same underlying spectrum. Thought and physical form are not opposed realities. They are variations in density, organization, or perspective within a single continuous field of existence. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is how it dissolves the familiar boundary between inner and outer worlds. If mind and matter are continuous, then thoughts are not entirely private, and physical reality is not entirely inert. The sharp line between what I think and what exists begins to blur, creating a sense of vulnerability. Your inner life may be more entangled with the world than you realized. Emotionally, this reframes responsibility. If mental states are part of the same continuum as physical events, then attention, intention, and perception carry weight beyond personal psychology. What you dwell on does not stay sealed inside you. This can feel empowering but also heavy, as if your inner chaos or clarity participates in shaping the world you move through. The mind-matter continuum also destabilizes reductionism. Consciousness is no longer a strange accident emerging from dead matter, and matter is no longer lifeless stuff awaiting animation. Both are seen as gradients of the same process, which can evoke awe and discomfort at once. Emotionally, this concept invites a quieter form of intimacy with reality. You are not a mind trapped inside a body, navigating an alien world. You are a localized intensity within a continuous fabric, where thinking and being, feeling and forming are not opposites, but neighboring expressions of the same unfolding existence. Existence without essence. Existence without essence is the idea that things do not come into the world with a fixed nature, predefined purpose, or built-in identity. They exist first, and only later acquire meaning, description, and direction. What something is cannot be separated from how it unfolds. Being comes before definition. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is how deeply it destabilizes the desire for certainty. You often want to believe that you have an essence, a core blueprint that explains who you are and what you are meant to do. Existence without essence suggests that this longing may be misplaced. There is no hidden script waiting to be discovered. You are not uncovering yourself. You are continuously forming. This idea reframes anxiety and freedom at the same time. If there is no essence, then there is no ultimate standard you are failing to meet. Guilt loses some of its authority because there was never a fixed version of you that you were supposed to become. At the same time, responsibility becomes heavier. Without an essence to hide behind, choices matter more. You cannot blame your nature for the direction your life takes. Emotionally, existence without essence can feel disorienting. The ground you expect to stand on never fully appears. Identity feels provisional, always in motion, always incomplete. Yet within that instability is a strange openness. You are not trapped by what you are. You are shaped by what you do, moment by moment. This concept also alters how you see others. If no one has a fixed essence, then people are not reducible to labels, past actions, or roles. Every encounter contains potential that is not yet settled. Judgment becomes less certain when identity is understood as something unfolding rather than something possessed. Existence without essence invites you to live without guarantees, to act without knowing who you will become, and to tolerate the discomfort of being unfinished in a world that constantly demands definition. Possibility as real. Possibility as real is the idea that what could happen is not merely imaginary or hypothetical, but possesses a kind of reality of its own. The future is not empty until it arrives. It already exerts influence through what might occur. Unrealized paths, unrealized selves, and unrealized outcomes press against the present, shaping choices before anything becomes actual. What makes this idea emotionally intense is how it reframes longing and regret. When you feel pulled towards something that has not happened, it may not be illusion or fantasy, but contact with a genuine possibility. At the same time, every choice you make closes off other real possibilities, not just in theory, but in actuality. Loss begins before anything is lost. Emotionally, this introduces a quiet weight to decision-making. You are not simply selecting one outcome. You are turning away from others that were, in some sense, already there. The roads not taken do not vanish without trace. They linger as absences that still feel present, shaping memory, desire, and identity. This concept also destabilizes the idea that reality is limited to what exists now. The present moment becomes crowded with futures that compete for realization. Anxiety and hope gain depth because they are responses to something real, not imaginary. Possibility as real transforms the feeling of uncertainty. Not knowing what will happen is no longer emptiness, but density. The unknown becomes heavy with potential, pressing inward on the present, asking to be chosen, delayed, or resisted, long before it ever becomes visible as fact. The multi-level self. The multi-level self is the idea that who you are operates simultaneously across different layers of awareness, each with its own logic, priorities, and tempo. Conscious thought is only one level. Beneath it move emotional patterns, bodily intelligence, social conditioning, and deeper, often unconscious currents that shape behavior long before you become aware of them. What makes this concept emotionally gripping is the loss of singular control. We like to believe there is one central I making decisions, yet the multi-level self suggests that action often emerges from negotiations between layers you barely notice. This can create a quiet unease, as if you are not fully in charge of yourself, even when you feel certain. Emotionally, this explains inner conflict. Wanting incompatible things, acting against your stated values, or feeling emotions that contradict your thoughts are not failures of character, but signals of misalignment between levels. One layer moves toward safety, another toward meaning, another toward pleasure or belonging, each pulling in different directions. The multi-level self also reframes self-knowledge. Insight is not achieved by thinking harder, but by listening across levels. Ignoring one layer does not eliminate it. It drives it underground, where it gains influence without accountability. This realization can feel humbling and slightly threatening. Emotionally, the multi-level self carries both fragmentation and depth. You are not broken because you are complex. You are layered. Identity is not a single voice, but a chorus, some parts loud, others whispering, all shaping the trajectory of your life, whether you acknowledge them or not. Reality as simulation. Reality as simulation is the idea that what you experience as the physical world may not be fundamentally real in the way it appears, but generated, structured, or rendered by deeper underlying processes. This is not about computers or technology, but about the unsettling possibility that reality itself operates more like an interface than a foundation. What you see may be functional rather than final. What makes this concept emotionally destabilizing is how it erodes trust in immediacy. You rely on your senses to tell you what is real, yet reality as simulation suggests that perception may be a simplified display, optimized for interaction rather than truth. The world feels solid and continuous, but that solidity may be an effect, not an essence. The feeling of certainty becomes suspect. This idea reframes existence as participation rather than observation. If reality is simulated at some fundamental level, then you are not standing outside it trying to understand it. You are inside the process, subject to its rules, while also helping sustain its unfolding. The line between user and environment blurs. You are both constrained by the system and expressive within it. Emotionally, this concept can trigger unease and fascination at the same time. Unease because it removes the comfort of a final ground. Fascination because it suggests that reality is flexible, responsive, and layered in ways you cannot fully access. Meaning shifts from substance to pattern. Reality as simulation also alters how you interpret suffering and purpose. Pain may feel more arbitrary, but agency becomes more local and immediate. What matters is not whether the world is ultimately real, but how you move within it. If existence is a simulation, then presence, choice, and attention are not diminished. They become the only places where reality actually happens. Consciousness as primary. Consciousness as primary is the idea that awareness is not a byproduct of the universe, but its foundation. Matter, energy, space, and time are not what give rise to experience. Experience is what gives rise to them. Reality does not produce consciousness as a late accident. Instead, consciousness is the condition that allows anything to appear at all. What makes this idea emotionally disorienting is how radically it reverses common intuition. You are taught to see yourself as a small awareness inside a vast, indifferent universe. Consciousness as primary suggests the opposite. The universe unfolds within awareness. This inversion can feel destabilizing, as if the ground beneath reality has quietly shifted. Emotionally, this idea intensifies responsibility. If consciousness is fundamental, then your inner state is not private or secondary. Attention, intention, and perception become active forces, not passive reflections. What you dwell on, fear, or ignore may participate in shaping reality itself. At the same time, this view can feel deeply affirming. Awareness is no longer a fragile flicker destined to disappear, but something woven into the structure of existence. Your capacity to experience is not incidental, it is central. Yet there is also unease here. If consciousness is primary, then the boundaries you rely on to feel separate and protected may be illusory. The line between inner and outer weakens. You are not merely in the universe, looking out at it. You are a localized expression of the very field that allows the universe to be known at all. Formless form. Formless form is the idea that structure can exist without being fixed, that there is a pattern present even when no stable shape can be identified. It points to an underlying order that gives rise to forms without ever becoming one itself. What appears solid is only a temporary crystallization of something that remains fluid beneath it. What makes formless form emotionally unsettling is how it undermines the trust placed in appearances. We rely on form to orient ourselves, to decide what something is and how to relate to it. Formless form suggests that what looks stable is already dissolving, and what seems absent may still be actively shaping what appears. Reality is less solid than it feels. Emotionally, this concept resonates with experiences that defy clear definition. Moments of transition, insight, or loss often feel structured but unnamed, as if something is happening without a shape you can point to. Formless form gives language to that tension, where meaning is present but refuses to settle into clarity. This idea also challenges permanence. If form is always emerging from something that never settles, then nothing fully arrives. Identities, beliefs, and systems are temporary expressions, not final states. This can evoke grief for what cannot last, but also relief. What feels confining is not as absolute as it appears. Formless form invites a different way of perceiving. Instead of clinging to outlines, you begin to sense movement, pressure, and direction. Emotionally, it teaches attentiveness without fixation. There is order without rigidity, presence without definition, and structure without a final shape to hold on to. Illusory permanence. Illusory permanence is the idea that stability is not a feature of reality, but a perception created by continuity and repetition. Things appear solid, lasting, and reliable because change happens gradually enough to escape immediate notice. What feels permanent is often only familiar motion, moving slowly. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is how it undermines the sense of security you build your life around. You trust relationships, identities, and structures because they seem stable over time. Illusory permanence suggests that this trust is based on perception rather than fact. Nothing is truly fixed. It only appears so while it is changing in ways too subtle to alarm you. This idea reframes loss. When something ends, it feels like a rupture, as if permanence has been broken. Illusory permanence suggests that nothing actually broke. The change was always happening. The ending only made the movement visible. This can feel cruel, as if reality has been quietly eroding what you relied on all along. Emotionally, illusory permanence produces both anxiety and clarity. Anxiety, because it exposes how fragile what you cling to really is. Clarity, because it explains why holding on creates suffering. You are not losing stability. You are noticing change that was always present. This concept also shifts how you see yourself. Identity feels continuous, but it is constantly being revised. The person you think you are persists only because the revisions are smooth enough to feel seamless. There is no fixed self beneath the changes, only a pattern that temporarily holds together. Illusory permanence invites a softer relationship with attachment. When you stop expecting things to stay the same, change becomes less of a betrayal and more of a truth revealing itself, moment by moment, beneath the illusion of stillness. Being and becoming. Being and becoming is the tension between what appears stable and what is always in motion. Being suggests presence, identity, and persistence. Becoming suggests change, transformation, and flow. This concept holds that reality is not one or the other, but the continuous strain between them, where nothing stays the same without ceasing to exist. What makes this idea emotionally resonant is how closely it mirrors inner experience. You feel like the same person from one day to the next, yet you are constantly changing in ways you cannot fully track. Memories shift, values evolve, desires fade or intensify. The self feels both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Emotionally, this creates a quiet tension. You want stability so you can feel grounded, yet growth demands instability. Holding on to who you were can feel safe, but it can also feel suffocating. Letting go allows movement, but introduces uncertainty. Being and becoming exposes the impossibility of choosing only one without losing something essential. This concept also reframes fear of change. If becoming is unavoidable, then resisting change does not preserve being, it distorts it. What you call stability may actually be stagnation, a slowing of the natural movement that gives life its vitality. At the same time, becoming without being dissolves coherence. Without some sense of continuity, experience fragments. Being and becoming suggests that identity is not a fixed core nor a complete flux, but a dynamic balance, where presence holds long enough to transform and change occurs without erasing all trace of what came before. The relational absolute. The relational absolute is the idea that what is ultimate is not a solitary, self-contained entity, but relationship itself. Instead of an absolute that stands apart from the world, untouched and unchanging, this concept suggests that the deepest level of reality expresses itself only through connection, interaction, and mutual presence. What makes the relational absolute emotionally disorienting is how it overturns the expectation of certainty. We often imagine the absolute as something fixed, final, and immune to influence. The relational absolute denies this stillness. It implies that even what is most fundamental is dynamic, responsive, and expressed only in relation. There is no ultimate thing to grasp, only an ongoing pattern of relating. Emotionally, this challenges the desire for independence. If the absolute itself is relational, then separation is not just a surface illusion. It is a misunderstanding of how reality is structured. This can feel unsettling because it suggests that self-sufficiency is never complete. Even the deepest truth depends on connection to exist at all. At the same time, the relational absolute carries a profound sense of belonging. If relation is fundamental, then connection is not secondary or fragile. It is woven into the fabric of existence. Loss, distance, and conflict hurt precisely because they distort something that is already meant to be shared. Emotionally, this concept reframes intimacy and responsibility. Every interaction participates in something ultimate. There is no trivial encounter, no meaningless exchange. The absolute is not elsewhere. It appears wherever relation occurs, unfolding moment by moment through the simple, unavoidable fact of things meeting one another. Subject-object unity. Subject-object unity is the idea that the separation between the one who experiences and what is experienced is not fundamental, but constructed. It suggests that the feeling of being a subject looking out at an object-filled world is a functional division, not an absolute one. Experience does not happen between two distinct entities. It happens as a single, undivided event. What makes this concept emotionally destabilizing is how deeply it challenges the sense of distance you rely on to feel safe. You are accustomed to standing apart from what you see, think, and feel. Subject-object unity dissolves that buffer. Sensations, thoughts, and emotions are no longer things you have, but expressions of the same field you are. This can feel invasive, as if there is nowhere to step back to. This idea reframes perception. Seeing is not something a subject does to an object. It is an occurrence in which both arise together. Without the act of perception, there is no clear object. And without the object, there is no perceiving subject. They co-emerge, inseparable, each giving the other definition. The world does not exist fully formed before you encounter it, nor do you exist independently of what you experience. Emotionally, subject-object unity can feel disorienting or intimate. Disorienting because it removes the familiar stance of observation, intimate because it erases distance. Nothing is truly outside you, and you are not sealed off from what appears. Experience becomes immediate, close, and unavoidable. This concept also softens resistance. When there is no clear boundary between you and what is happening, opposition loses coherence. Fighting experience begins to feel like fighting yourself. Subject-object unity invites a quiet shift from control to participation, where life is no longer something you face, but something you are continuously co-arising with. Emergent order. Emergent order is the idea that structure, pattern, and coherence arise not because they are imposed from above, but because countless small interactions quietly organize themselves. Order is not always planned, designed, or controlled. It appears when conditions align, when simple processes repeat, and when relationships accumulate into something larger than any single part intended. What makes emergent order emotionally unsettling is how it diminishes the role of centralized control. You are taught to believe that order requires authority, intention, or design. Emergent order suggests that meaning and structure can arise without a guiding hand. This can feel disorienting, as if the world is holding itself together without anyone in charge. Emotionally, this challenges the belief that chaos is always failure. What looks disordered in the moment may be the raw material from which a new pattern is forming. Uncertainty becomes less of a threat and more of a threshold, where something not yet visible is organizing itself beneath the surface. This idea also reframes personal struggle. You may feel scattered, unfocused, or unstable, yet emergent order implies that coherence does not always announce itself immediately. Small habits, repeated thoughts, and minor decisions can accumulate into a direction long before it feels intentional. At a deeper level, emergent order unsettles the need for guarantees. There is no promise that order will appear, only the possibility that it can. This introduces both humility and hope. You are not fully in control of outcomes, but neither is everything arbitrary. Patterns may be forming through you even when you cannot yet see their shape. Determinism versus freedom. Determinism versus freedom is the tension between the idea that everything unfolds according to prior causes and the felt experience of choosing, willing, and deciding. It is not merely a philosophical debate, but a lived conflict that plays out every time you act and then wonder whether you could have acted otherwise. What makes this concept emotionally gripping is how personal it becomes the moment it is taken seriously. If determinism is true, then your thoughts, desires, and decisions arise from chains of causes that began long before you were aware of them. Biology, history, conditioning, and circumstance quietly shape every impulse. The sense of authorship begins to feel fragile, almost theatrical. Emotionally, this can provoke fear or resignation. If your choices were inevitable, then responsibility feels heavy or hollow at the same time. Regret becomes complicated. Pride becomes suspicious. The idea that you could have done differently starts to dissolve, leaving behind an uncomfortable ambiguity about praise and blame. Freedom, on the other hand, is felt directly. You experience hesitation, deliberation, and resolve. You feel the weight of choosing, especially when the outcome matters. To deny this experience feels like denying something intimate and undeniable. Yet the more closely you examine it, the more it seems entangled with forces you did not choose. This tension never fully resolves. Emotionally, it leaves you suspended between accountability and humility. You act as if your choices matter because they feel urgent and real, while knowing they arise from conditions you did not create. Determinism versus freedom lives in that unresolved space, where agency is experienced but never fully owned, and where every decision carries both necessity and risk at the same time. The problem of other minds. The problem of other minds is the unsettling realization that you can never directly access another person's inner experience. You see bodies move, hear words spoken, and observe behavior, but consciousness itself remains hidden. No matter how close you feel to someone, their thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are ultimately inferred, never known with certainty. What makes this concept emotionally disturbing is how it quietly isolates you. Connection feels real and intimate, yet it rests on an unprovable assumption that others experience the world in a way remotely similar to you. Love, empathy, and trust all depend on this assumption, even though it can never be confirmed. You are always relating to signs of consciousness, not consciousness itself. This idea reframes loneliness. Even in the presence of others, there is a fundamental gap that cannot be crossed. You can describe your inner world, but description is not transmission. Something is always lost. This can create a subtle ache, the feeling of being forever slightly misunderstood, even by those who know you best. Emotionally, the problem of other minds can provoke anxiety or humility. Anxiety because it suggests that deception, misunderstanding, and misalignment are always possible. Humility because it reveals that you are just as opaque to others as they are to you. Everyone is navigating from the inside, guessing outward. This concept also deepens ethical awareness. If you cannot know another mind directly, then certainty about others' intentions and experiences becomes dangerous. Assumptions harden too easily. Care becomes more important than certainty. The problem of other minds leaves you in a fragile position, forced to trust without proof, to empathize without access, and to build relationships on something that can never be fully verified, only continually felt and risked. The hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is the question of why experience exists at all. Not how the brain processes information, not how behavior is produced, but why any of it feels like something from the inside. Why there is a lived interior to reality instead of silent machinery. Why sensation, color, pain, love, and meaning arise rather than empty function. What makes this problem emotionally disturbing is how close it cuts to your sense of reality. You can explain neurons, signals, and computations, yet none of those explanations seem to touch the raw fact that you are here, feeling this moment. The gap between physical processes and lived experience feels unbridgeable, like a tear in understanding that refuses to close. Emotionally, this creates a quiet unease. If consciousness cannot be explained by physical description alone, then the foundation of reality may be stranger than assumed. You begin to sense that something essential about existence escapes measurement. The most intimate part of reality, your awareness, resists being reduced to parts and causes. This problem also destabilizes certainty about other minds. You assume others are conscious because they resemble you, but consciousness itself cannot be observed directly. This creates an unspoken vulnerability. The thing that matters most is also the thing you can never fully prove exists anywhere but within you. The hard problem intensifies the mystery of being alive. It suggests that no amount of external knowledge may ever fully explain inner life. You are left facing the unsettling possibility that consciousness is not a puzzle to be solved, but a fundamental feature of reality that explanation circles around without ever fully entering, leaving experience luminous, undeniable, and profoundly unresolved. The nature of nothingness. The nature of nothingness is the question of whether absence itself has a presence. It asks whether nothing is truly empty, or whether it is a subtle condition from which things arise and into which they disappear. This idea unsettles the assumption that existence and non-existence are clean opposites. What makes nothingness emotionally disturbing is how close it feels. You do not encounter nothingness as an abstract concept alone. You sense it in silence, in loss, in the gaps between thoughts, and in the awareness of mortality. It presses against the edges of experience, reminding you that what exists is surrounded by what does not, or what no longer does. Emotionally, nothingness provokes fear because it resists imagination. The mind cannot picture its own absence without collapsing back into presence. This creates a looping anxiety, where you try to understand what it would mean to not be, yet can only do so while being. Nothingness becomes both terrifying and unreachable. At the same time, nothingness carries a strange calm. In moments when thoughts fall away, what remains can feel open, quiet, and unburdened. The absence of form becomes a kind of relief. This tension between dread and peace makes nothingness emotionally complex, not purely negative or empty. The nature of nothingness also reshapes how existence is valued. If being emerges from nothing, then existence feels precarious and precious. Every moment stands out against an infinite backdrop of absence. Nothingness is not just the end of things. It is the silent contrast that makes presence feel sharp, fragile, and unbearably vivid. Time as directionless. Time as directionless is the idea that time does not inherently move forward, progress, or aim toward anything. The sense of past flowing into future may not belong to time itself, but to how consciousness organizes experience. What feels like a one-way journey may be a psychological orientation rather than a feature of reality. What makes this concept emotionally destabilizing is how deeply it disrupts the narrative of progress. You understand your life as moving somewhere, growing, improving, heading toward resolution. Time as directionless suggests that this movement is imposed, not given. Events do not march forward, they simply occur. The arrow you feel may come from memory accumulating in one direction, not from time pushing you along. This idea reframes regret and hope. Regret depends on the past being fixed behind you, and hope depends on the future being open ahead. If time itself has no direction, then these emotional anchors loosen. The past is not fundamentally behind, nor is the future inherently ahead. They are relational positions created by how experience is stored and anticipated. Emotionally, time as directionless can feel disorienting, even frightening. Without a temporal arrow, motivation loses its familiar structure. Why hurry, improve, or prepare if time is not carrying you anywhere? Yet this same idea can feel strangely freeing. Pressure eases when existence is no longer a race toward an endpoint. This concept also shifts how you experience moments. If time has no direction, then each moment is not a step in a sequence, but a complete occurrence. Meaning no longer depends on where something leads, but on what it is. Life stops feeling like a line you are failing to follow correctly and starts feeling like a field you keep re-entering from different angles. Time as directionless invites a quiet confrontation with urgency itself. If time is not moving you forward, then the rush you feel may be coming from within, asking to be questioned rather than obeyed. Identity over time. Identity over time is the question of what, if anything, remains the same as you move from one moment to the next. Your body changes, your thoughts shift, your memories fade or distort, yet you continue to say "I," as if it refers to a single, enduring entity. This concept asks whether that continuity is real or simply a story that smooths over constant change. What makes this idea emotionally unsettling is how fragile personal sameness becomes under scrutiny. If every part of you is in flux, then what exactly is being preserved? The feeling of being the same person you were years ago may rely less on substance and more on memory and narrative. Identity begins to feel like something maintained rather than something possessed. Emotionally, this raises a quiet fear of disappearance. If identity is not anchored in something stable, then who are you when memory fails, when beliefs change, when roles fall away? The self starts to feel less like a core and more like a thread stretched across time, vulnerable to breaking. At the same time, identity over time can feel liberating. If the self is not fixed, then you are not imprisoned by who you were. Past mistakes do not define an unchangeable essence. You are allowed to transform without becoming someone else entirely. This concept forces you to confront how much of your sense of self depends on continuity you rarely question. Identity over time may not be a solid object carried forward, but an ongoing act of coherence, recreated moment by moment, just stable enough to be recognized, just fragile enough to always be at risk of slipping away. Free will illusion. Free will illusion is the idea that the sense of choosing freely is a compelling experience rather than an independent causal force. Decisions feel authored from within, yet when examined closely, they appear to arise from unconscious processes, prior conditioning, and situational pressures that operate before awareness catches up. What makes this concept emotionally disturbing is how directly it targets the feeling of ownership over one's life. The belief that "I chose this" is woven into pride, guilt, ambition, and regret. If free will is illusory, then the self begins to feel less like an origin and more like a witness arriving late to its own actions. Emotionally, this can produce resistance or grief. Letting go of free will feels like surrendering dignity or responsibility. Without true choice, praise and blame lose their sharpness, and the idea of self-made identity begins to unravel. The fear is not just of determinism, but of becoming passive or meaningless. Yet there is also a subtle relief in this idea. If actions emerge from causes beyond conscious control, then relentless self-judgment can soften. The weight of having to be perfect, decisive, or consistent loosens. You begin to see behavior as something that happens through you, not solely because of you. Free will illusion does not erase experience. You still deliberate, hesitate, and commit. The feeling of choice remains vivid and unavoidable. Emotionally, the tension lies in knowing that this feeling may not reflect ultimate control, yet still governs how life is lived. You move forward as if you choose, while knowing that the choosing itself may be part of the illusion you cannot step outside of. Free will illusion. Free will illusion is the idea that the feeling of choosing freely is convincing, immediate, and deeply personal, yet may not reflect how decisions actually come into being. Choices feel intentional and authored, but beneath awareness, they may already be shaped by biology, memory, conditioning, emotion, and circumstance long before the conscious mind claims them. What makes this idea emotionally destabilizing is how closely freedom is tied to identity. To believe you freely choose is to believe you are the true source of your actions. When that belief is questioned, the self begins to feel thinner, less solid. Pride, guilt, ambition, and regret all lose their familiar footing. If choice is illusory, responsibility becomes emotionally complex rather than cleanly owned. Emotionally, this can provoke fear or resistance. The idea of not being in control feels like a loss of dignity, as if life is happening through you instead of because of you. The mind pushes back, clinging to moments of deliberation as proof of freedom, because letting go feels like becoming irrelevant. Yet there is also a quiet relief hidden in this concept. If free will is partly illusory, then relentless self-blame begins to loosen. You stop fighting yourself for having certain thoughts, impulses, or limitations. Compassion becomes easier when actions are seen as arising from conditions rather than pure intention. The illusion does not disappear simply because it is questioned. You still experience choosing. You still feel pulled between options. Emotionally, free will illusion leaves you suspended in paradox, acting as if you are free while sensing that freedom may be more of an experience than a cause, something felt deeply, even if it cannot be fully owned. Cosmic purpose. Cosmic purpose is the idea that the universe is not unfolding randomly, but oriented toward something, even if that something cannot be clearly named or understood. It suggests that existence may carry an intrinsic direction, not in the sense of a fixed plan, but as a deep tendency toward meaning, complexity, or expression. The universe may not be conscious in a human way, yet it may not be aimless. What makes cosmic purpose emotionally intense is how it confronts both hope and fear at once. If there is purpose at a cosmic scale, then your life may be participating in something far larger than personal goals. This can feel comforting, as if your struggles are not isolated accidents, but it can also feel heavy, because it implies that existence is not indifferent. Something may be unfolding through you, whether you understand it or not. This idea destabilizes the belief that purpose is purely subjective. You are often told that meaning is something you must invent. Cosmic purpose suggests that meaning may already be present, pressing gently against awareness, waiting to be recognized rather than created. This challenges both nihilism and complete autonomy. Emotionally, cosmic purpose can provoke awe and resistance. Awe, because it hints that reality is quietly coherent. Resistance, because it threatens the comfort of insignificance. If nothing matters, failure feels lighter. If something matters at a universal level, responsibility becomes unavoidable. Cosmic purpose also reframes suffering. Pain stops being purely absurd and begins to feel like part of a larger movement, even if that movement is never fully revealed. This does not justify suffering, but it changes how it is held. Existence starts to feel less like a random collision of events and more like a long, unfolding gesture whose meaning you are inside of, not standing apart from. Infinite universes. Infinite universes is the idea that reality does not consist of a single, unique world, but of endlessly many worlds, each unfolding in its own way. Every possibility that can occur does occur somewhere, in some version of reality. What you experience as this universe may be only one expression within an immeasurable expanse of others. What makes this idea emotionally overwhelming is how it diminishes the sense of uniqueness you attach to events. If infinite universes exist, then every choice you make is mirrored by other versions where you chose differently. Success, failure, survival and loss all happen, just not all here. This can feel destabilizing, as if the weight of consequence is both magnified and diluted at the same time. Emotionally, this concept intensifies the feeling of insignificance. Your life may no longer feel cosmically special if it is endlessly replicated in variation, yet at the same time, it can deepen the sense of preciousness. This exact configuration of experiences, memories, and relationships still occurs only here, in this branch, once. Infinite universes also challenge the idea of fate. If every outcome exists somewhere, then destiny loses its singular authority. Meaning is no longer guaranteed by cosmic uniqueness, but must be created within a sea of alternatives. This idea quietly shifts how you experience choice. You may not be choosing what happens in all realities, but you are choosing which reality you inhabit. Among infinite worlds, the one you live in is shaped by the decisions you make, even if other versions continue unfolding beyond your reach. The self as construct. The self as construct is the idea that the sense of I is not a fixed entity discovered within, but a mental structure assembled over time. It is built from memory, language, social feedback, and repetition, forming a coherent center that feels stable even though it is constantly being updated and revised. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is how intimate the illusion feels. The self does not appear artificial. It feels immediate and undeniable. Questioning it can feel like questioning your own existence. If the self is constructed, then the voice you trust most, the one narrating your life, may be more of a process than a thing. Emotionally, this idea explains why identity shifts across contexts. The self you experience alone is not the same self that appears in public, under pressure, or in love. These are not masks hiding a real self, but configurations of the same construction responding to different conditions. Realizing this can feel destabilizing, as if there is no final version to settle into. The self as construct also reframes suffering. When thoughts attack you, when shame or fear feels personal and absolute, this concept suggests that the pain arises within a structure that can change. The suffering feels real, but it is not anchored to an unchangeable core. Emotionally, this idea carries both loss and freedom. You lose the comfort of a permanent identity, but gain the possibility of flexibility. The self becomes something that happens rather than something you are, continuously assembled in the moment, convincing enough to feel real, yet never fixed enough to be beyond change. Mind as process. Mind as process is the idea that the mind is not a thing you possess, but an activity that is constantly happening. There is no fixed mental core sitting behind your thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. Instead, the mind is a continuous flow of events, sensations arising, thoughts forming, emotions shifting, none of which stay long enough to be owned. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is how it destabilizes the sense of mental control. You tend to believe that there is a stable you directing thought, choosing emotions, and managing attention. Mind as process suggests that this manager is itself part of the flow, not separate from it. Thoughts think themselves into being. Feelings arise before you decide to feel them. Control becomes something you experience, not something you exert. This idea reframes mental struggle. Anxiety, rumination, and intrusive thoughts are often treated as malfunctions. If mind is a process, then these experiences are not invaders but expressions of movement within the system. The problem is not that the mind moves, but that you expect it to stop. Stillness becomes a temporary configuration, not a default state. Emotionally, mind as process can feel relieving or frightening. Relieving because you no longer have to identify with every thought that passes through. Frightening because the sense of a stable inner anchor weakens. There is no final authority inside your head, only patterns repeating with variation. This concept also softens identity. If mind is a process, then who you are is not a fixed mental structure, but an ongoing negotiation between memory, perception, and attention. You are not broken when your mind changes. You are functioning exactly as something that is alive, dynamic, and unfinished. Reality as perception. Reality as perception is the idea that what you experience as reality is inseparable from the act of perceiving it. The world you live in is not simply out there, fully formed and independent, but is continuously shaped by sensation, interpretation, memory, and expectation. What feels solid and obvious is already filtered through the limits of your awareness. What makes this idea emotionally destabilizing is how it erodes trust in immediacy. You assume you are seeing things as they are, yet reality as perception suggests you are always encountering a version of the world shaped by your inner state. Fear sharpens threats. Desire amplifies promise. Exhaustion dulls meaning. The same situation becomes a different reality depending on how you perceive it. Emotionally, this can feel isolating. If reality is perception, then no one ever fully shares the same world. Even when standing side by side, people inhabit different experiential realities, shaped by their histories and emotional filters. Understanding becomes fragile, and misunderstanding feels inevitable. At the same time, this idea carries a subtle power. If perception participates in reality, then changing how you see alters what you experience. Shifts in attention can transform environments without anything external moving at all. Suffering and joy become partly perceptual events, not just reactions to circumstance. Reality as perception forces you to confront how deeply involved you are in creating the world you believe you are merely observing. You are not outside reality, looking in. You are inside perception, and perception is the lens through which reality continuously takes shape. The observer effect. The observer effect is the idea that observation is not neutral, that the act of looking, measuring, or attending to something alters what is being observed. Reality does not simply reveal itself untouched, it responds to attention. To notice is already to interfere, even when the interference is subtle. What makes this concept emotionally unsettling is how it undermines the fantasy of objectivity. We like to believe we can stand outside events, watching without consequence. The observer effect suggests this is impossible. Your presence changes the situation. Your focus shapes what emerges. Even silence becomes a form of participation. Emotionally, this introduces a quiet responsibility. If attention alters outcomes, then what you dwell on matters more than you may want it to. Patterns strengthen when they are noticed. Possibilities fade when they are ignored. This can feel heavy, as if the mind is constantly influencing reality simply by being aware. The observer effect also reframes self-awareness. When you observe your own thoughts or emotions, they shift. Anger softens, anxiety transforms, clarity dissolves or deepens. This can feel disorienting because the act of trying to understand yourself changes what you are trying to understand. Emotionally, the observer effect blurs the boundary between inner and outer worlds. Observation is not passive reception, it is engagement. You are never just watching life unfold. You are part of the conditions that determine how it unfolds. Every moment of attention subtly reshapes the field you are looking into, whether you intend it or not. Existence precedes essence. Existence precedes essence is the idea that you are not born with a fixed nature, purpose, or identity waiting to be uncovered. You appear first, and only afterward do meanings, roles, and definitions begin to form around you. Who you are is not discovered by looking inward for something permanent, but shaped through living, choosing, and responding. What makes this concept emotionally confronting is how it removes the comfort of destiny. It suggests there is no hidden blueprint explaining what you are supposed to become. The traits you cling to, the labels you identify with, and the stories you tell about yourself are not revelations of an inner essence, but temporary constructions layered onto existence after the fact. This can feel destabilizing because it means there is no final answer to who you really are. This idea reframes freedom in a way that is both liberating and heavy. If existence comes first, then nothing about you is guaranteed. You are not protected by nature, fate, or design. Every choice contributes to who you become, and inaction becomes a choice as well. Responsibility cannot be outsourced to essence. There is no "this is just how I am" that holds up under scrutiny. Emotionally, existence precedes essence can feel overwhelming. Without a fixed core, identity feels fragile, constantly at risk of collapse or revision. Yet, within that fragility is openness. You are not confined by what you were yesterday. You are not obligated to fulfill a predefined role. This concept also alters how you see failure. If there is no essence to betray, then mistakes do not reveal who you truly are. They are events, not verdicts. You are always in the process of becoming, never finished, never finalized, and never fully defined by any single moment, belief, or choice. Unity of opposites. Unity of opposites is the idea that opposing forces are not truly separate, but depend on one another to exist at all. Light and dark, order and chaos, strength and vulnerability, self and other. Each gains meaning only through the presence of its opposite. Rather than cancelling each other out, opposites form a single dynamic whole. What makes this idea emotionally unsettling is how it dissolves moral and psychological certainty. You are taught to choose sides, to eliminate contradiction, to move toward one pole and reject the other. Unity of opposites suggests that this impulse misunderstands reality. What you resist may be the very thing that gives shape to what you value. Emotionally, this reframes inner conflict. The parts of yourself you try to suppress do not simply disappear. They continue to operate in shadow, gaining intensity the more they are denied. Unity of opposites suggests that wholeness does not come from purity, but from integration, from allowing tension to exist without forcing resolution. This concept also destabilizes the idea of progress as linear improvement. Growth does not move cleanly away from darkness toward light. It oscillates. Periods of clarity are followed by confusion. Strength emerges through vulnerability. Meaning is forged where contradiction is allowed to coexist. Unity of opposites invites you to sit inside discomfort rather than escape it. Instead of trying to erase what feels incompatible, you are asked to recognize how opposites shape and sustain one another. Reality, including your inner life, may be less about choosing the right side and more about holding the tension that makes either side possible. The meaning of being. The meaning of being is the question of whether existence itself carries significance or whether meaning is something imposed after the fact. It asks not what life is for, but whether simply being alive, present, and aware already holds value before any purpose is assigned. What makes this question emotionally heavy is how easily it slips beneath everyday distractions. When routines fall away, when goals lose their urgency, the question rises without warning. Why is there something rather than nothing? And why are you here to experience it? The absence of a clear answer can feel like standing in a vast, silent space with no instructions. Emotionally, the meaning of being exposes vulnerability. If meaning is not guaranteed, then existence can feel arbitrary, even fragile. This can provoke anxiety or despair, especially when familiar sources of purpose fail. The fear is not just of meaninglessness, but of discovering that nothing was promised in the first place. At the same time, this question carries quiet intimacy. If being itself is meaningful, then value does not depend on achievement, recognition, or outcome. Simply existing becomes enough. This can feel unsettling to a mind trained to justify itself, yet deeply relieving to a body tired of striving. The meaning of being does not resolve into a final explanation. Emotionally, it lingers as a pressure rather than a conclusion. It asks you to live without certainty while remaining awake to existence itself, to feel the weight and tenderness of simply being here without knowing exactly why that fact matters so much.